In the year 2005, Albuquerque police detective Ida Lopez noticed that women with ties to drugs and prostitution had been disappearing from Albuquerque. She made a list with the women's names and to see what was occurring. In 2009, in West Mesa, a woman walking her dog stumbled across a human bone. The first of many in what would become one of the largest crime scenes in history and an enormous endeavor for the police. The Albuquerque police had to carefully remove skeleton after skeleton from a mass burial site in a 100-acre barren patch of desert on Albuquerque's far southwest Mesa. 10 of the missing women from Detective Ida Lopez's list who disappeared between 2001 and 2005 who were reported missing were found in shallow graves in the empty dirt lot, and an 11th woman not reported missing and an unborn child were also found in the same area. Families of the missing women in Albuquerque began leaving memorials before all the women were even identified and tried to remember the happier times of their lives. Whilst many of the women struggled with drugs, their families never thought they would turn up dead.
Investigators hope it will get them closer to catching a serial killer.
Forensic scientists have now identified 2 more of the 11 women found buried on the Albuquerque West Mesa. What seemed so unlikely months ago is now almost done. There is only one unidentified victim left. Here's News 13's Maria Medina.
Dick, so far all the women identified led risky lifestyles. All but one were from New Mexico, and all were mixed up with drugs and prostitution, including Evelyn Salazar and Virginia Cloven, the latest women to be identified.
I asked them if they were sure.
Robert Cloven never stopped hoping.
You don't want to believe your child's dead.
Even when police dug up 11 bodies out on Albuquerque's West Mesa.
My God, that is sad. So many victims up there, and nobody knows who they are. And our daughter's missing since 2004, and Lord help us, we hope she ain't one of them.
But Virginia Cloven was. He last spoke to his daughter in 2004. It's the same year Evelyn Salazar disappeared. Salazar told relatives she was going to a park for an hour with her 15-year-old cousin, Jamie Barella, but they never returned. Police say Cloven and Salazar were involved in drugs and prostitution. An investigator on the case who didn't want to be named says identifying them now gives them a better profile of the West Mesa victims and what type of women the killer targeted. Clues that eventually could lead to him.
This is Virginia here.
Cloven says his daughter took a wrong turn after her brother's murder and ended up on the streets.
Before that, she was a loving kid. I mean, she was the politest person you ever met.
But no matter what, she always called him. So when his phone stopped ringing in 2004,
it's a phone number for the police for missing persons.
He didn't stop calling police, hoping they'd find his daughter. Now he says he hopes police will find her killer.
There's nothing that's going to ever bring her back, but we would like to see the guy punished, and that's all we can hope for.
And there is still one more victim to be identified. Police say that should happen soon. We asked investigators if they think Salazar's cousin, Jamie Barella, could be the 11th victim. Police told us they have not ruled that out yet, but they're looking at other women too. Back to you.
All right, Maria, both Salazar and Cloven were identified through DNA. The others were identified through dental records. Police say they still do not have a prime suspect in this case.
But they do say that tracing Selenia Edwards' last steps could lead them to a break in the case. Investigators identified her last week. She was the only victim not from New Mexico. Edwards ran away from her foster home in Lawton, Oklahoma in 2003 at the age of 15. We spoke with her cousin who lives in Houston, where Edwards was born. She had a message for the killer.
Only thing I can say is God bless your soul, and I hope that you don't have kids, and I hope they don't grow up to be like you, and I hope your soul burns in hell, because you have to be a very sick, psychotic person to do something like that to a child.
Edwards' family says Selenia has no ties to New Mexico.
In July 2009, 5 months after the initial findings of the bones of the victims, the then chief of Albuquerque Police, Ray Schultz, announced that police had narrowed the suspect pool to 5 people. One of those 5 people was 39-year-old printing company employee Lorenzo Montoya. He was a person of interest before any of the bones were found.
Lorenzo Montoya lived near the burial site. He told co-workers he had killed women and buried them on the West Mesa, and he had 3 arrests on his record for picking up prostitutes on East Central. In 1999, police followed Montoya and caught him raping and strangling a woman in his truck. She survived.
Lorenzo Montoya made several homemade sex tapes, and in one of them sounds can be heard of what seems like duct tape being pulled whilst the camera was pointed at a wall. In December 2006, Lorenzo Montoya had allegedly bound with duct tape and strangled a 19-year-old escort named Sharika Hill in his trailer after meeting her in an online chat room, withdrawing money from an ATM and directing her to his home. When Lorenzo Montoya was allegedly trying to dispose of Sharika Hill's body, her boyfriend showed up and went into Lorenzo's trailer and saw Sharika Hill's partially clothed body bound by her ankles, wrists and knees with duct tape and a cord. Mr. Montoya then tried to move Sharika's body from his trailer. Then an argument ensued between Sharika's boyfriend Frederick Williams and Montoya. Montoya grabbed a revolver and Frederick Williams also retrieved a semi-auto handgun and shot at Mr. Montoya several times, eventually killing him. The next day, on the morning of December 17, 2006, Sharika's body was found partially wrapped in a blanket on planks of wood pulled from a fence next to a red Nissan Terrano parked by a trailer of a neighbors of Montoya. Montoya's body was found just behind hers over the fence. The Albuquerque police searched Lorenzo Montoya's trailer and found numerous items such as money in a toolbox and duct tape and a book based on a child abuse case in California next to his bed. They also found 2 safes, one with numerous pornographic magazines and another with guns in it. The police found Lorenzo Montoya's Macy's receipts for purchases of blankets on December 16, 2006 and found a Macy's bag with blankets on Montoya's coffee table. Montoya's silver Ford Focus rental car was searched and Sharika Hill's belongings were found in a trash bag in the trunk of the car. Her identification card, a phone and an unused condom were some of the items in the bag. The Albuquerque police found Montoya's JVC camcorder in his trailer that it's assumed he used to film his home movie sex tapes. Investigators viewed some of his homemade sex tapes and wanted to find the identities and information of 2 females in them. Albuquerque police found and read pages of Sharika Hill's notebook, and just like many of the West Mesa murder victims, she was in need of money and took risks by meeting up with strange men on a regular basis. Investigators didn't believe Ms. Hill was Montoya's only murder victim. Investigators analyzed and tested Lorenzo Montoya's entire living room carpet to try to find any DNA from any of the West Mesa victims, but it came back negative. Many people believe Lorenzo Montoya was the West Mesa bone collector and fit the modus operandi, and after he died in 2006 there was seemingly no more missing women showing up after 2006 found in the West Mesa burial ground. Ultimately, he died before the remains of the West Mesa victims were found, and the Albuquerque police have claimed they have no solid evidence to tie him to the murders. Years went by since the remains were found and no cause of death was revealed, as the surviving bones did not reveal how the girls died, nor were they able to detect DNA from the burial site that could prove a match to a killer. Investigators had assumed the victims had died by strangulation. The Albuquerque police looked at numerous persons of interest and looked into the prostitution escort scene in the city. One of the persons of interest was Mercy Escort Services owner Fred Reynolds. Fred was a pimp and police found pictures of several of the West Mesa victims in his home, but no physical evidence linked him to their murders. Fred Reynolds died of natural causes on January 2, 2009. Investigators also tried to find information and construct a timeline to see if convicted serial killer and former FBI informant Scott Lee Kimball had stayed in Albuquerque between 2001 and 2005. Scott Kimball pled guilty to killing 4 people in Colorado between 2003 and 2004. Kimball denied killing any of the women in New Mexico. Robert Howard Bruce, nicknamed the Ether Man, was also looked at as a person of interest because he was connected through DNA and other evidence to rapes in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He met his second wife at the Stone Face Tavern Bar in Albuquerque in the year 2001. He was convicted in 2011 for a 2006 rape which occurred in Texas whilst serving time in prison for an attempted murder charge on a police officer which occurred in Pueblo, Colorado in 2009. He was convicted and sentenced to 156 years for the rapes he committed in New Mexico in 2012, and in 2013 he was sentenced to another 177 years for his 18 sexual assaults which occurred in Norman, Oklahoma between 1985 and 2001. Police said Bruce would stalk his victims, break into their homes, overcome them and use a stun gun and a chemically soaked rag with ether or chloroform before raping them. A business owner named Ron Irwin from Joplin, Missouri was also looked into by police, and he was shocked when investigators from Albuquerque showed up at his properties with search warrants. Irwin was a photographer and owned a studio for a number of years. Thousands of photographs of women were found at his properties in the searches, and Irwin was known to travel to Albuquerque between 2003 and 2005.
Good evening. Could these new photos be a new clue in the West Mesa murder investigation?
Today, Albuquerque police released photographs of 7 women. Pictures they will only say that they obtained from a source. Some of them are quite disturbing. News 13's Amanda Goodman is here with the latest.
It's been nearly 2 years since Albuquerque police unearthed the remains of 11 women and 1 unborn child at a vacant lot on the city's West Mesa. 10 of the women were involved with drugs and prostitution, and all 11 were last seen between 2003 and 2005. Police say they have a handful of suspects but haven't named any. In August, detectives went to Joplin, Missouri, where they searched the home and business of a man named Ron Irwin in connection with the case. Detectives won't say what they seized from the properties, but Irwin's mother told us that he liked to take pictures and would come to Albuquerque for the state fair and would stay in motels. Police insist that Irwin is not a suspect or even a person of interest. Today, Police Chief Ray Schultz wouldn't elaborate on where these pictures came from. He also said they're not sure if the women are connected to the West Mesa murder case or not, but added that their physical description matched those of the victims. The chief also addressed the 4 pictures of women who don't appear to be awake.
It appears that some of the women may be unconscious. Again, we don't know what that reason is at this point in time, if they were just sleeping or something else had occurred to them.
The chief is asking for any help the public can give in identifying the women. You can remain anonymous. Dick?
Okay, Amanda, that was a pretty quick look at those pictures. If you want to get a better look at them, we have posted all 6 on our website, krqe.com.
In 2010, a local private investigator received a strange phone call from a man claiming he was the West Mesa killer.
A local private investigator receives a chilling message from a man who claims he is the West Mesa killer.
Action 7 News reporter Will Carr listened to that voicemail and joins us now with the story.
Doug and Shelley, to this day, the West Mesa killer has never been identified or arrested. And while the murderer may still be on the streets, one local private investigator says he continues to get messages from a man who has claimed that he killed all of the women and the fetus and buried them in the desert. And the investigator just received another call last week and agreed to play that for us today.
You know who I am.
An anonymous caller left those words on the answering machine at the Final Notice Investigative Services Group several days ago.
He stated, "You know who I am." And I said, bingo.
Dr. George Walker Sr. says he immediately recognized the voice. He says the same man sent him an email and left several messages last year claiming to be the West Mesa killer. At the time, Walker was investigating the disappearance of Nina Harone, a woman who police once thought might be a West Mesa victim. She did not end up being one of the 11 women found in the desert, but to this day, Harone remains missing.
I know Nina. I know who killed her.
And so now he's trying to taunt Final Notice Investigative Services Group by telling us that he got Nina too.
Walker says he has already contacted the police department and made them aware of the message.
It only takes one tip for us to solve this case.
That's why Officer Nadine Hamby says they'll take a hard look at the latest message, just like they did last year with the email and phone calls. She says they exhausted every avenue with those messages and plan to do the same with the latest call from a man who claims to have intimate knowledge of Nina Harone's disappearance.
I know who killed her and I know who did it. And I know why. Okay, bye.
The police department tells us that they get leads anytime a story on the West Mesa murder mystery airs. They tell us that they check into every lead that they get. They also say they think that someone from out of town may be able to crack this case because many of the victims were transients. Shelley.
Walker's involvement in this case is not without controversy. He claims he's reached out to the families of West Mesa victims offering his help, but the families tell us he has never contacted any of them. If you have any information on the West Mesa mystery, call APD's hotline at 1-877-SOLVE-APD.
In 2014, the news media brought up Joseph Blee, who was considered a person of interest early on in the investigation.
The name Joseph Blea has never been revealed by police, but News 13 has learned Blea has been on the suspect list for years. He's currently in jail in Santa Fe awaiting trial in a slew of rape cases, many of them involving young girls. His history has always troubled detectives. So is the fact that his DNA was found on the jeans of a prostitute who was killed and dumped off East Central in the late 80s. News 13 has learned a tag for a tree bought at an Albuquerque nursery was among the few pieces of physical evidence discovered in the makeshift graves. Blea, who worked as a landscaper, was a frequent shopper at the nursery.
On June 8, 2015, Joseph Blee was convicted and sentenced to 36 years, 2 mandatory terms of 18 years, to be served consecutive to one another, for the 1988 rape of a 13-year-old where he controlled her when she was going home from school by knife point wearing a ski mask. He then sexually assaulted her.
A man who raped a girl 26 years ago is going to prison. A district court judge sentenced 58-year-old Joseph Blea today to 36 years behind bars. A jury convicted him last week. Police say the victim was an 8th grader when she was attacked by a masked man in her home after school. Now, her rape kit was not tested until 2010, which led investigators to Blea. Blea has been accused of several rapes back in the 1980s and 90s near McKinley Middle School. Now, Blea is set for trial on 3 more rapes in late October, and he's also a suspect in the biggest murder investigation in Albuquerque history. Here's Kim Holland on special assignment.
Police have called him a monster. Joseph Blea is an accused serial rapist targeting dozens of teenage girls in the late 1980s. Investigators say Blea wore a ski mask when he attacked victims and was usually armed with a knife. Police say after the rapes, he would steal victims' underwear. They called him the McKinley Middle School rapist. Here's APD spokeswoman Nadine Hamby.
It's just mind-boggling how you can look at this man and even think of him as a human. He's an animal.
In October 2015, Joseph Blee was convicted of the other sexual assaults and is currently serving 90 years behind bars. He attempted to try to appeal the convictions over a legal complaint regarding how his DNA was taken, but the appeal was denied. Joseph Blee claimed he knew some of the West Mesa victims and was a client of theirs. Officers who helped dig up the bones found a plant tag for a spearmint juniper next to Virginia Cloven's remains. Detectives traced that tree tag to a nursery in California that sends plants to Albuquerque, and Blee's business records indicated he bought plants from nurseries that sold the California plants. It's unclear if detectives were ever able to directly tie that tree tag to Blee. On the 13th anniversary, The news media released a video mentioning the $100,000 reward and that the case is seemingly still active with a retired Albuquerque homicide detective on board to help the case.
It has been 13 years since the West Mesa murder case was uncovered. A single bone found on the West Mesa. When the digging was done, the remains of 11 women were found. After years of investigating, still no arrests have been made in the case, and now investigators are saying there are more suspects than they originally thought. Here's News 13's Stephanie Chavez.
This person may have been charming or friendly in order to build trust or a relationship of some kind with the women first.
Investigator Liz Thompson is describing the suspect in the West Mesa murders.
This person is a predator who sought out vulnerable women.
Thompson, a retired APD homicide sergeant, is now the contract investigator on the West Mesa murder case.
To date, we have received close to 1,200 tips on these cases.
A case APD says they've never given up on.
The investigation into what happened to the women on Ida's list has been extensive. Hundreds of people have been interviewed.
Back in 2009, authorities uncovered the bodies of 11 women, with one of them being pregnant, on the West Mesa near 118th Street. No arrests have ever been made, but back in 2018, investigators named 2 prime suspects. Lorenzo Montoya, who police say strangled a prostitute at his home, then was shot to death by the woman's pimp. Authorities say the murders stopped after he was killed. And Joseph Blea. He's a serial rapist who was sentenced to 90 years in prison after DNA connected him to attacks on middle school girls in the 80s and 90s. But during a press conference this morning, Thompson said they're not the only 2 people investigators are looking into.
We have eliminated many suspects. At this time, there are a number of people who are being investigated as persons of interest.
Thompson didn't go into detail on the other suspects, but did say most of them have stemmed from tips, all of which they take very seriously.
If you have any information related to these murdered and missing women, please contact the Albuquerque Police Department.
Albuquerque police did say the public is not in danger from this case.
Investigator Ida Lopez believes other women who were on her missing list may be additional victims of the West Mesa killer and is still looking for more information to find out what happened to them. The West Mesa murders case is still officially unsolved, and investigators still need help to find out more information to bring justice for the victims and their families.